at 8:35 AM on this Tuesday morning's OTB AM. We're turning our attention to matters Evan Ferguson, because the hype train does not stop. We're not going to get too carried away over in this country, but delighted to say Andy Naylor from The Athletic joins us on the show this morning to touch on Brighton and Evan Ferguson and other issues as well. Andy, good morning, how are things?
Good morning to you, very well, thank you. Looking forward to Europe.
Absolutely, yeah, it's exciting times for Brighton.
It certainly is, yeah. Qualifying for Europe for the first time in the club's history, and it's going to be the Europa League rather than the Europa Conference League, because they have such a big goal difference advantage going into the end of the season. So, although they're not mathematically guaranteed Europa League at the moment, 6th place, that's what it's going to be in reality.
We did want to talk to you about our own Evan Ferguson. We mentioned him at the top of the show as well today. He scored another couple of goals at the weekend. He's someone that every time we talk about on the show, Andy, we get a little bit of slack for maybe bumping up the hype train a little bit too much. But what's the vibe around Evan Ferguson in Brighton?
There's no doubt about it. He is a really exciting prospect. The way he's come through this season in his sort of first proper season in the first team. 10 goals in 22 outings, which is pretty impressive at the level he's playing at. The most prolific teenager in the Premier League, 18 years of age. What I really liked against Southampton on Sunday in particular was his first goal, which was an important breakthrough. And it was just the shot, 15 yards out, angled drive, didn't think twice, bang. And it was actually the velocity of the shot that, Alex McCarthy, you could question the Southampton goalkeeper, but when you look at it again, I just don't think he was expecting it to be hit as hard as it was. Yeah. So he's just got no fear at all, Evan. And then for the second goal, really good work by Kaoru Mitoma, another of Brighton's young stars down the left, and he was in the right place to put it away. So, he's made a really big impression with not just goals, but just his all-round game.
He does seem to have found that happy place between no fear and almost humility as well. Like
absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, and I know Shane has interviewed him. I've never interviewed him, but he does come across as this guy that is absolutely soaked in confidence. But there's no real. He's not arrogant. He just seems to have gotten that balance, maybe. Correct.
Yeah, very humble when you speak to Evan. Yeah, there's no cockiness about him. No attitude. I think a lot of the praise for that perhaps goes down to his dad, Barry, who of course was a player, central defender. I'm sure he's getting a lot of good advice from his father and the people around him, and indeed at the club, the way he's being handled by the club. You've got Roberto De Zerbi, his head coach, who's looking at it not just for the now, but for what's ahead for Evan. Hence, when he had this ankle injury against Chelsea recently, there could have been a temptation to rush him back, but they didn't do that. They waited till he was properly okay again. He's got Danny Welbeck there, a great example, a great role model for him to work alongside. So, he's very much got his feet on the ground. I don't think he will get carried away in any way by the noise around him in Ireland.
I got a good bit of slagging recently. I was saying that I think I essentially said I think Evan Ferguson's play outside the box, like Haaland and Ferguson do have a couple of things in common, that both their dads were professional footballers. I don't think that should be understated, actually. I think they were probably brought up in a different way to like your average kid, because I guess if you're a dad and you played professionally and you see your kids showing early promise, you can kind of throw the whole kitchen sink at it. And if you have two like big lads and athletes that they were, but I suppose the point I was making was that I think he doesn't get enough credit, Evan, for the quality of his link-up play and his hold-up play outside the box. Would you agree? And I guess what does he have to improve on?
I think there's areas for improvement on that, but he's learning. And what's really fascinating under Roberto De Zerbi, Danny Welbeck says he's learning, even with his wealth of experience, the clubs he's played at, because Brighton don't really play with what most people would recognise to be an out-and-out number 9. it's almost kind of a false nine. So they drop in quite a lot. The forwards drop back into midfield, linking up the play. That's very much part of De Zerbi's method. So there's quite a lot of that, yeah. And I guess there were sometimes areas I can remember in one of the recent games, Roberto, as he often does, turning around in exasperation when Evan on one occasion was a bit loose in possession. He does that with everyone, Roberto. People get a bit confused. His passion on the touchline is not directed at officials usually. It's directed at his own players when they're not quite as precise as he'd like them to be. But he's in a great place to learn. He's in a great club to learn. You look going forward, that he'll get European experience now, which can only benefit his development.
What's he worth, Andy?
What's he worth? It's very difficult to put a figure on it. Obviously, at this stage, I would immediately. You're probably talking. I don't know what Brighton were wanting. I think what we've got to bear in mind is strikers, forwards who score goals always come with an added premium. To put a figure on it, but if we're talking about what he could become, then we could be talking huge figures. You know, we're looking at a club that have got two midfielders in Moises Caicedo and World Cup winner Alexis McAllister, who could, if they're sold in the summer, fetch between them in the region of £160 million. Evan, and let's stress, it's still very early days, but if he maintains his development, he'll be getting into those kind of high figure fee brackets.
It's interesting, Andy, because he signed this new contract, long-term contract with Brighton until 2028. Does that tie things up for him for the next few years at Brighton, or do you feel that clubs will be sniffing around? Because there's been rumours of Jose Mourinho being a massive fan of his, and rumours of AS Roma coming in for him. I know he's a Manchester United fan from when he grew up as well as a kid. So does the contract tie things down for Everton for the next year or two at the Amex, do you think?
I think it's a combination of those things. Yes, it shows his level of commitment. It shows the club's belief in him, and also it protects their interest in terms of interest externally, which there will be, and there will continue to be. I've no doubt about that. I'm sure we'll see stories linking him with clubs in the summer. I don't see him going anywhere at this stage. I don't see him going anywhere soon. I think he knows, the people around him know, he's at the perfect club to develop. If we look back at his decision to join Brighton, there were lots of big clubs interested in him. He went for a trial at Liverpool, Everton, Celtic. He chose Brighton because he could see the pathway. And here he is, 18 years of age, getting regular first team involvement in probably the biggest and toughest league in the world. So I think he's in a happy place, and I think he'll stay in that place
It's also,
for a while, yeah.
It is interesting that what you say, because I got that sense from speaking to him before as well, that he was very grateful to Brighton and the work that they've done in improving, you know, his little skills. We talk often about his physicality just because of his size, I guess, but as you mentioned this morning, Andy, like his finishing technique and little things like that as well. And also, I guess there was a little bit of fear, maybe certainly for myself, when Graham Potter was leaving Brighton, and I was thinking, you know, Potter's been very good to Evan Ferguson. He brought him into the first team squad, but that transition from Potter to De Zerbi for Evan Ferguson was seamless, which speaks volumes about the player as well, I suppose.
Absolutely, yeah, and I don't think you were alone in fearing that. I think there were a lot of people who wondered what was going to happen when Graham Potter, who'd taken the club from a bottom six club, they were bottom six in his first two seasons in the Premier League, to ninth last season, goes to Chelsea. Roberto De Zerbi, who, I mean, the club knew what he was all about, but probably a lot of people wondered who this guy is, didn't know much about him, but we've seen him take the team on further, improve them further, improve individual players with his coaching and his methods and his belief. And I think we've seen that with Evan. He's just grown and grown and grown this season.
What's De Zerbi's stock actually as well? Because like if you look at some of the basket case appointments that top Premier League clubs have made, either in the interim, where does he rank now?
Well, you have to say what an inspired appointment, and it's not by accident this, because Brighton, this is their way under the owner chairman Tony Bloom, beg your pardon. They're very forward thinking.
He'd like being called Tony Bloom, I think. That's kind of got a nice ring to it. Probably call his next horse that.
They're very proactive. They're not reactive. They think ahead. They plan for everything, whether that's losing staff, and they've lost a lot of staff in the last 12, 18 months. Losing players, and they've lost some key players in the last 12, 18 months. But there's always something in place. And with Roberto De Zerbi, they knew about his work at Sassuolo. They knew about his work briefly at Shakhtar Donetsk. He was their number one choice, and it's proved to be, as I said, an inspired appointment when you look at where he's now taken the club. That style of play they have, of playing out with no fear at all. You can only see a sort of bright future ahead.
It's funny as well, like that must be important for Evan, Andy, in the sense that like he's playing at a club that from the top down, like if Evan were thrown into like a so-called bigger club, but a club that's kind of all over the shop, like that could really stymie his development.
Absolutely. And I think the other key thing you've got to remember, and there have been many examples of this in the past. Let's just say big club X comes in, loads of money, hypothetical world, he went. He would not be getting the first team opportunities he's getting at Brighton, and that's what I'm talking about with that pathway, that clear identity that young players can see that at Brighton I've got a real chance of progressing and developing and getting first team football. Not often, very rarely the case at bigger clubs that happens. More likely to be playing in the under-21s, going out on loan. So that will come. It will come that if he continues his development, if he continues to progress, that will come naturally anyway. He's only 18, so there's no rush. And I think he knows that. I think the people around him know that. The club know that. So, as I said before, I think he's in a really good place to develop his career.
Even holding on to, you mentioned, Andy, of course, Caicedo and McAllister potentially could be out the exit door. We'll wait and see across the summer. Quick two-parter for you. How important is it, even from Evan Ferguson's perspective, that Brighton hold on to Mitoma, because he's been crucial to the club this year? And also, secondly, the Joao Pedro arrival from Watford, a £30 million striker, will that have any impact on Evan Ferguson?
Well, two things. Let's take Mitoma first. I don't see him going this summer. You can never say never, but I don't see that happening this summer. I wouldn't anticipate movement beyond Caicedo, McAllister, and possibly goalkeeper Robert Sanchez, who's lost his place to Jason Steele, and is not particularly happy about that. Mitoma, again, fantastic breakthrough season he's had. But I think, and again, there's plenty of clubs that will be looking at him, watching him, but they'll probably want to see what happens, because I think the challenge for Kayor and indeed Evan is the next season. You know, these breakthrough players who people don't necessarily know much about. People know all about them now, so it will be interesting to see if they can continue that progression next season. So we'll have to wait and see on that, but I don't see Mitoma going. And sorry, I've now forgotten what was the second part.
Joao Pedro's arrival from Watford.
Of course,
will that have any impact?
Yeah. Well, I think this is part of the process. Brighton, and De Zerbi's spoken a lot about this. During the run-in, they've had a really congested spell of fixtures, and against big teams, big games. They've had injuries, and it's caught up with them a bit, the sort of 3 games a week scenario. They're going to have that a lot next season in Europe. Obviously, you're playing regularly to start with, sort of Thursday, Sunday. So he's spoken a lot about the fact that they're not used to that, and they need to get used to it. So they need more. They need a bit more depth. They have got quite a lot of young quality depth, but they need a bit more. And they've made their intentions clear with João Pedro, £10 million more than the club have ever paid for a player. So they don't routinely splash out huge sums, transfer fees. 21-year-old, real kind of typical Brighton identity in terms of the type of players they like. Brazilian forward, can play in quite a few different roles across the front line. And obviously that adds, from Evan's point of view, that increases the competition for forward places. But I think he'll still get plenty of opportunities. Domestically, they've got Premier League, Carabao Cup, FA Cup, then Europa League on top of that. So there will still be plenty of opportunities for him, I'm sure.
Just briefly, Andy, sorry, this is the thing as well that I often fear for players in general, young players. The schedule is absolutely basket case. Now, Evan has to come off like a fairly hectic schedule, playing Man City tomorrow, but then he doesn't really have a rest because Ireland are in action in a massive qualifier soon against Greece.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you've got the international element as well. But we've seen that with, let's not forget, 8 Brighton players went to the World Cup. The likes of Matoma, McAllister, Caicedo, Purvis Estupiñán, Ecuadorian left back, who's another player who's had a really impressive first season. So they had a lot of players at the World Cup, and I think people have lost sight of that sometimes in the recent run-ins when some individual performances have perhaps not been at the level we've come to expect, and some of the team performances haven't been. A lot of these players are a bit drained, frankly, both physically, but as much as anything mentally as well. So you would like to think, that goes back to my point about De Zerbi and the way he's handled Evan. He's managing him carefully. He's managing his minutes carefully because he knows this is not just about Evan and Brighton now. This is about his long-term future too.
Andy, great stuff. Thanks for joining us this morning.
No problem at all. Good to speak to you.
Brilliant stuff. Andy Naylor there from The Athletic, talking Brighton and Evan Ferguson and De Zerbi.